Mr. Foreign Minister, it's a pleasure to see you again. It's a pleasure to be here.
Good to be with you and good to be with this distinguished audience here.
You have witnessed the events at the United Nations last week. The president called Iran a corrupt dictatorship, a rogue nation. He said the UN deal was an embarrassment. President Rouhani later said that Iran was a country inclined towards moderation. He had said it had no expansionary ambitions and that it was unmoved by threats and that it would be a pity if the Iran agreement was destroyed by a rogue newcomer to the world of politics. And that by violating the deal, it would hamper American credibility. So I want to talk about your meeting first with the American Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson. What did you talk about? What was the tone and substance of that conversation?
Well, it was a civilized meeting. I think after that speech, Secretary Tillerson set the bar to be very low, just not throwing shoes at each other was. Yeah. So we certainly achieved that. We didn't throw shoes at each other. Everybody in the group, and it wasn't a bilateral meeting, because people need to be reminded that this was not a bilateral deal. This was a multilateral agreement, and the meeting took place in the informal consultation room of the Security Council, where we started this process 4 years ago, as was just mentioned with Secretary Kerry. And it was a good reminder to everybody that this deal is not a treaty, is not a bilateral agreement or a multilateral agreement which needs ratification by US Senate, but it is in fact a Security Council resolution. And we were sitting in the informal consultation room of the Security Council where these resolutions are worked out usually. This one was not worked out in that room. It was worked out during 2 years of tedious negotiations in Vienna. And prior to that, 10 years of basically posturing. And I'm sorry to see that we are going back to the posturing, pre-negotiation posturing. Everybody in the room reminded Secretary Tillerson that this was a good deal. A good deal is not a perfect deal, because there is no perfect deal. No deal can be perfect, because perfect for one side of the deal would be disaster for the other side.
It is not a zero-sum deal.
It can't be a zero-sum deal. It has to be a positive-sum deal, and we decided to define the objective in the beginning of the process in a way that was amenable to a solution. And by that, we decided not to resolve all of our differences. We decided to stick to it. Unfortunately, U.S. position was reiterated by Secretary Tillerson about what they perceived to be problems.
Did the Secretary Tillerson say that if, in fact, certain things did not happen, if it was not modified or renegotiated, the United States would leave the deal?
No, he didn't. This administration leaves people guessing.
All right. I think they like that, actually.
I think unpredictability may be an attribute in foreign policy, but unreliability certainly isn't.
Let me ask a couple of things about the deal. One, the notion, there's much misunderstanding about it, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I do want to understand it from your perspective. There is no sunset clause in this deal.
No.
What is the significance of the 10-year limitation?
Well, you see, we believed that Iran had not violated any international agreement, and if Iran accepted certain increased monitoring of its activities, certain greater transparency, it did not need to go through extra limitations. And the United States and some others believed that we needed some period of confidence building. And this was the subject of great negotiations. So we agreed to 10 years of limitations for Iran's enrichment activities. We agreed to keeping our stockpile at 300 kilograms. We agreed to reducing our centrifuges.
And after 10 years, you can enrich as much as you want?
Yeah, but Iran will be bound by very strict monitoring mechanisms. We agreed to implement. Let me tell you something, that the deal is based on lack of trust. No part of this deal is built on confidence or trust.
It's trust but verify. And President
No, it's
Reagan-
don't trust and
don't.
verify.
Yes, all right.
Because neither side trusted the other side. And I have to be blunt with you, this was the case. We did not trust the United States, and the United States obviously did not trust us. So everything in the deal is based on reciprocity and measures taken on both sides. So if Congress behaves in 6 years from now, 8 years from the signing of the deal or the agreement, we will be ratifying the additional protocol. Additional protocol is the most intrusive inspection regime that is available in the international community. Iran is now implementing additional protocol because we are not confident about behavior by the US. We will become a party, an official party to the additional protocol in 6 years' time, provided that the United States takes care of its responsibilities. And that would mean Iran would be permanently, because additional protocol does not have a withdrawal clause. You cannot withdraw from the additional protocol. So once we ratify it, it means that Iran will be permanently under the most intrusive inspection regime that is available. But then Iran will become a normal NPT member. A normal NPT member would be obliged not to pursue nuclear weapons. And Iran will be obliged not to pursue nuclear weapons, in addition to the fact that we do not consider nuclear weapons to be in our national security interest.
You evidently have made a number, you and your president has made a number of statements hoping that the United States will not and say it is not in their interest. And you obviously do not want them to withdraw because you believe that this is a good deal for both sides. Now, my question
Well, as I said, it's not a perfect deal.
But
it leaves a lot to be desired from our perspective. Certainly the implementation of the deal
what
by the United
happens
States.
if they withdraw? The United States government decides to withdraw.
This would be the basis for Iran to make a decision to withdraw. But that would depend on a number of factors that would play, including how Europe would react to this. And then, as you know, Iran is not a monolith, so I cannot even predict what would happen in the political, although President Trump likes to put it in another way, but as you have witnessed during our election, there is a very lively debate going on in the public sphere in Iran, broadcast on television, even between presidential candidates.
So what did President Rouhani mean when he said Iran is inclined towards moderation?
Well, just listen to the two speeches, and you will understand from the tone of the two speeches that Iran is inclined towards moderation. We believe that prudence, respect for international law, respect for the rights of your citizens, respect for the interest of everybody, trying to reach, as you pointed out, non-zero-sum games, non-zero-sum deals where the interest of everybody is preserved, are the ways for sustainable international life these days. We live in a different environment. Our world has become intertwined. You cannot have security at the expense of insecurity of others. You cannot have prosperity while others live in poverty. So these are all elements of Iran's moderation policy.
But many people around the world, not just Americans, do not see a moderation policy. They think that Iran, after the signing of the deal, has been aggressive in the non-nuclear arrangement details of policy between Iran and the rest of the world. Aggressive in terms of your engagement around the world, in Syria, in Yemen, in Lebanon. And that therefore it violates the spirit, because the spirit of the deal was that coming out of this relationship between Iran and the 6 countries would be perhaps a progress towards making other kinds of arrangements that would bring Iran into the community of nations even more. Well, that was the idea. And that spirit, they believe, has been violated.
Well, first of all, the United States is not in compliance with the letter of the deal. Statement by President Trump before the General Assembly, which was not a campaign rally, but a UN the highest global institution, was a violation of paragraphs 26, 28, and 29 of the deal, of the letter of these paragraphs, not the spirit that somehow somebody defines. But let's deal with the regional situation. Who has been on the right side in our region? Let's go back.
It depends on whether you're talking to the Saudis or you're talking to the Iranians.
I'm talking to you. From 1980 to 1988, who supported Saddam Hussein? Who fought Saddam Hussein?
The Iranians fought Saddam Hussein, and the United States supported Saddam Hussein.
In 1990, when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, who supported Kuwait? When the Taliban took over Afghanistan, who supported the legitimate government of Afghanistan? Who supported...
Okay, but that's an interesting point, because
who supported the Taliban?
But people now believe that Iran is supporting the Taliban against the established government.
No, they're not. We're not.
In no way is Iran involved in supporting the Taliban in Afghanistan, hoping that it will somehow be to your benefit if the Taliban...
Come on, the Taliban killed 11 Iranian diplomats. We almost went to war with the Taliban when the US allies recognized the Taliban as the legitimate government of Afghanistan. But I'm not finished. In 2003, who was the first country to recognize the government of Iraq, the Governing Council of Iraq, and who did everything to undermine that government? In 2001, who was behind the establishment of a new democratic government in Afghanistan, and who continued to support the Taliban? From 2003 to 2011, who was behind every move to undermine the Iraqi government?
Who overthrew the government of the Taliban?
Who overthrew the government of the Taliban? The Afghans, with the support of Iran and the United States. But your allies, the ones who are accusing us, were recognizing the Taliban, were providing it with financial support. Hold on. Then who was behind ISIS in Syria and Iraq? Who supported financially?
Well, who supported ISIS in Syria and Iraq?
Who supported financially? Your allies. Now they are exposing one another. After this Persian Gulf crisis between four or five of your allies, they are accusing each other. They are exposing each other who supported more the terrorists. All of them did.
Who supported the Hezbollah in Syria? Hezbollah coming into Syria from outside, from Lebanon, to join the Syrian government in defending it.
Yeah, but who prevented Damascus, Baghdad, and Erbil from falling in the hands of ISIS? Now, people...
I think President Putin might say he did.
No, we did. Erbil, President Putin cannot say he did. Erbil, we went to the support of the Kurds. Erbil was few hours...
So I hear you, and I've heard this before.
No, but it's important. I mean, you hear me, but you continue to repeat the same allegation. I'm asking...
And you continue to repeat the same points.
No, but I'm making a historical point. I'm asking you... I'm challenging anybody who can say anybody other than Iran went to Erbil to prevent the ISIS from taking over. All the Peshmergas were putting their stuff on their trucks and leaving Erbil as the ISIS was moving in. President Barzani called us, asked for our help, and we went there.
So
we
went therefore, I would assume then you're much in favor of President Orban, what he would like to do with respect to the referendum on Kurds having independence.
We believe that's a very serious mistake, and we believe that as people who are friends of the Kurds, we will remain eternal friends of the Kurds, but we believe that that was a major strategic mistake. We're the ones who went there and helped them, but we believe that's a strategic mistake. It will have connotations and consequences that will not be limited to Iraqi Kurdistan.
It's important to hear you say this, because I know how passionate you believe it on behalf of your country. And in many cases, you lay a case and an argument for where Iran has come to the support of people who we have been friends with or opposed to. But it is, among other people, French President Macron has said, perhaps we should be having a conversation about new protocols that would look at these cases in which there is disagreement about Iran's engagement, whether it is Yemen or whether it is Syria or whether it is Lebanon or whether it is Afghanistan. Now, are you open to looking at these questions of how Iran is engaged in its behavior to these other countries?
Well, we've always been an active participant in peacekeeping efforts and peacemaking efforts. You want me to go back to history? Ask Jim Dobbins, who represented the United States in the 2001 Bonn conference to establish the new government in Afghanistan.
Right.
Ask him who saved the day, and he'll tell you yours truly.
Yeah, yours truly being you.
Yeah.
Can we make one historical point here, which is I just learned backstage in terms, when Saddam was invading Kuwait, he wanted Iran to join him.
Yes, he did.
And suggested that if he was successful, that Iran and Kuwait
and Iraq
would share the spoils of all the GC countries.
And he sent all his fighter jets to Iran to prove his sincerity. But we didn't take the bait.
And in fact, you joined the coalition against him.
Yeah. We didn't join the coalition against him, but we helped Kuwait.
Right.
We were the first country to condemn Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, even before the GCC did. These are important historical facts for people to remember.
So characterize the relationship with the United States today.
Do I need to?
Yes, please.
Well, I think the United States is making a strategic mistake of sending a message to the world that is not reliable as a negotiating partner. That the United States will take, in any deal, in order to reach a deal, you give concessions and you take concessions from the other side. And no deal will be sustainable if you take the concessions and pocket them and then you ask for more after you conclude the deal. Nobody else will come and negotiate with the United States. The United States will become known as an unreliable partner, even for others. Now, I believe even Europeans are saying that if the United States were to break the deal, nobody else would trust the West. I think the United States has to prove itself that it is a reliable partner.
Are you saying that there will be no new negotiations with the countries that negotiated the nuclear deal? It is a closed deal, that Iran has no interest in negotiating any new aspects of that deal, nor does Iran have any interest in the suggestion by the French president, that they have visit new protocols having to do with behavior in the region. No interest on the part of Iran.
Well, let's deal with one issue, each issue at a time. Iran and other members of P5+1,
right,
with one exception, believe that this deal should not be reopened because they know that every aspect of the deal was subject to long negotiations. On other issues, Iran has always, separately, as an independent issue, Iran has always been ready to engage with the international community. I just had a meeting with the Secretary General where I assured him that Iran will continue to cooperate in order to bring an end to the disaster in Syria. And let me remind you once again that 4 years ago, I presented a 4-point plan for the resolution of the crisis in Syria. Unfortunately, people were not prepared to take it. Then a few years later, events proved that my plan was the right plan. And now we are trying with Mr. de Mistura to see that whether we can add something to Astana, the process which has brought de-escalation.
So tell us where that is in terms of Iran's perspective. What is happening in Syria and what the possibilities are for extending.
No, it's not. Let's put the nuclear deal aside. Okay. That deal is done. The United States will either live by it or exit from it.
And if
it's a simple choice. It's a simple choice. You cannot have the cake and eat it too. The United States has to make a strategic choice and send a message to the global community whether it is a reliable partner or not. And whether people negotiating with this administration will have to look behind their shoulder, whether 4 years down the road the next administration will break the words, the commitments of this administration. This is not going to work. And there are a lot of agreements, even agreements, treaties, that are not subject to congressional ratification. You have executive agreements in the United States, but this was not one of them. This was a Security Council resolution. So let's put this deal aside. Let's not open.
Okay, but just
and already
give me one
negotiate.
final answer, though, in terms of if, in fact, the United States withdraws from the deal, what will Iran do?
Well, it depends.
You have suggested that the United States will suffer credibility issues, but what will Iran do?
We will make the appropriate decision based on the circumstances.
Okay.
There will be,
Then
you see, I told you, Iran is not a monolith. I will not make a decision for Iran, nor will anybody else. We will have a debate in Iran about the consequences. We will have a variety of views. Even today, there are people in Iran who believe that the United States has been less than compliant with other aspects of the deal, and therefore Iran should not stay committed to the deal. That's an argument that is being made vociferously in Iran by, in my view, a vocal minority. But that argument will gain even greater momentum and greater support where the United States, had the United States decided to leave the deal.
I want to ask one question, since you've said, obviously, that Iran is not a monolith, and we do know about that. I mean, which sides are winning in Iran? President Rouhani was reelected.
Yeah.
Does that mean that moderates are on the ascendancy? And would you describe him as a moderate in terms of Iranian politics?
Well, I believe he had a platform, and that platform and he tried to explain that platform, domestic agenda and global agenda, received the vote of the population. He may, it wasn't certain that he would win.
I know.
He did. Next election, we will see. People of Iran.
I'm asking the trend. Where is Iran going? That's my question.
It depends. I mean, I'm asking you about the trend here in the United States. You vote Republican, you vote Democrat, you vote Trump. It depends. I mean,
but we have the foreign minister here who knows the players, and we're asking you here at the Asia Society to give us an insight as to where things are going.
I don't have a crystal ball. I know the players. You know the players in the U.S. If I ask you who will win the next presidential election in the U.S., can you tell me who will win 2018 congressional race? Can you tell me? I can't tell you. Our societies are not that different. We have the same process. Maybe President Trump likes to think of Iran as a dictatorship. It's interesting that all his allies don't have even seen a ballot box in their country, and he calls Iran a dictatorship. So be it as it may. But this is a process. I don't know what will happen in Iran. And I respect... What is important, Charlie, is that we derive our legitimacy and our power from our people, unlike your friends in the region. We do not derive our legitimacy from the beautiful military equipment we get from the United States.
So, having said that, help us understand the conflict when the president went to Riyadh and supported Saudi in basically saying, we are in a struggle with Iran for influence in the region. And the president made a speech in which he basically said, I'm on your side.
Yeah, and what happened in 4 days' time? You had the worst repression in Bahrain. 5 innocent civilians, demonstrators were killed. And a few weeks later, you had this mishap between Saudi Arabia and Qatar and others. So, just examine the consequences of wrong messaging to our region. Our region does not need this type of messaging. Our region does not
It's coming from the region.
Our region does not need macho messaging. Our region needs the message of dialogue. Our region needs the message of trying to work out our differences through
Is the conflict between Saudi Arabia and Iran a conflict for influence in the region? Is it a conflict between Sunni and Shia? Is it a conflict between two countries who have different missions?
I don't know. I think it's a conflict based on one side, from our perspective, making all the wrong choices. I wanted to tell you what those wrong choices were. The Taliban in Afghanistan, ISIS in Iraq, al-Nusra in Syria, all the wrong choices. Is it our fault that we didn't make the wrong choices? We do not believe, we do not have the illusion that we can exclude Saudi Arabia from this region. We believe that Saudi Arabia is an extremely important player in the region, whose role needs to be respected. But we expect Saudi Arabia to also recognize that we are an important part of this region, and they can never exclude Iran. As we will never try to exclude Saudi Arabia has to abandon the illusion. Because once I sent a message,
do you think that
I sent a message to a Saudi foreign minister, to the late Saudi foreign minister, told him that we are prepared to work with you so that we can accommodate each other in the region. And he told me, Arab world is none of your business. I'm telling him,
Arab world is none of your business.
Yeah, I'm telling him, Arab world is our business. We are in the region. We need to work together for security of this region. And we are prepared to work together for security of this region.
So what will happen in Yemen?
Again, in Yemen we tried, and I ask you to ask people who are in the know. We tried to put an end to this conflict before it started. When it started, we tried to use our influence in order to have a ceasefire. We spent several days during very difficult nuclear negotiations. So instead of talking about the nuclear issue, we talked about Yemen, how to end the situation in Yemen. It wasn't Iran which reneged on its promise, it was the other side. And in each and every attempt, the other side has torpedoed a possibility for a negotiated solution in Yemen. Let me be clear. We believe that Yemen requires a political solution. We believe that Syria requires a political solution. We believe that none of these issues can be resolved militarily. And I make that a categorical statement, that we are prepared to use our influence.
But will you acknowledge that you have a stronger presence, either in terms of Iran or in terms of Hezbollah, on the ground in Syria than, say, Saudi Arabia does?
No, I believe I believe that they made the wrong choices. I'm repeating that. They made the wrong choices, and that is why their presence is diminishing. It's not that they didn't have a presence. They had a high contracting group of high negotiating group in Riyadh, which composed of their allies. But let me ask you this question. Who is bombing the hell out of Yemenis? What is the reason that Yemen has 700,000 cases of cholera? Are we bombing Yemen?
Why is Iran in Yemen in the first place?
We're not in Yemen. People do not accept their country to be invaded. People do not accept their country to be bombed. People have to realize that this is not the way to do business. We need to understand that issues in our region require dialogue, not fighter jets. We need to understand that issues in our region can only be resolved by putting people around the negotiating table and finding a solution. Our solution for Yemen is ceasefire, humanitarian assistance, a Yemeni dialogue, and elections so that we can have an inclusive government in Yemen. This has been the case we have insisted upon. Same for Syria. We believe this, and this has been on the table for 4 years. Solution in Syria is ceasefire, a national unity inclusive government, constitutional reform, elections. We put that on the table 4 years ago on Syria. People decided to disinvite us from the meeting in Montreux. We put that on the table with regard to the situation in Yemen. People decided to neglect that and try, with the delusional hope that they could win militarily in Yemen. Nobody has won Yemen militarily for 1,000 years. And the
people of Yemen are the ones who are suffering.
And the people of Yemen are suffering. But the people of Yemen, as the people of any other country, will accept suffering, but will not accept their dignity being trampled upon. This is the case. I think people need to realize that others are resistant to pressure.
What does this have to do with the conflict between Saudi Arabia and Qatar, and the conflict between between Iran and Saudi Arabia? In what way is that connected, in your judgment, to the conflict between Saudi Arabia and
I think
Qatar?
we're not a party to any of those conflicts. People try to find.
But you're of the region.
We are of the region, and we believe that they were miscalculations.
By the Saudis?
Unfortunately.
And what was that miscalculation?
And the UAE. Miscalculations about being able to suffocate a country into submission.
Their idea is that they want to suffocate Qatar into submission. So that,
isn't it?
I'm asking.
Aren't they trying to suffocate? Did they close their borders? Did they close their airspace? Didn't they close their airspace? Didn't they close their borders? Didn't they close their backs?
And what did Iran do?
We opened it. We opened ours. We would have done the same for Saudi Arabia. Had people tried to close their airspace to Saudi Arabia, we would have opened our airspace to Saudi Arabia, because I'm not claiming this. We proved it with Kuwait. We believe that stability in the region, as well as stability of every government in the region, is in our national security interest.
Why didn't you think so many countries question what Iran's ambitions are in the region?
Well, you see, I cannot judge why others are doing things, but it has become fashionable in Washington to blame Iran for everything, and it's your ticket. I remember people...
No, we referenced here other countries who were party to the nuclear deal, who raised questions about Iran's behavior.
Well, we're talking about policy. We're talking about human beings and countries, not animals, that we talk about behavior. We talk about policy. And I believe Iranian policy in the region is very clear. I think people have to bring themselves to the level of mutual respect. Just do not talk about the behavior of other countries. Talk about their policies. Talk about their practices. And see who has done more to fight extremism in the region. Who has done more and more consistently to fight terrorism in the region. Have we been on the side of terrorists in Syria, in Afghanistan, in Iraq?
I've asked you this before. So what do you say to the question posed by Henry Kissinger that Iran has to decide whether it wants to be a country or a movement?
Exactly what I told Henry Kissinger. We will make that decision when the United States makes that decision to be either a country or a cause. Whenever you're prepared to make a decision that the United States is no longer a cause, then we will make a decision.
So you haven't made the decision?
And you haven't made the decision for the past 200 years. Don't expect us to make that decision in 40 years.
The argument is often made in the United States that the United States is an idea more than it is a country.
Good.
And
so you can understand. You can understand. But does that make the United States a destabilizing force?
No.
It doesn't. It's your policies or our policies that makes us either stabilizing or destabilizing. I think this dichotomy between being a cause or a state is an erroneous dichotomy. It's just trying to theorize a policy that has been doomed to failure for the past 40 years. The United States has failed to recognize the realities in the region. When President Trump goes before the United Nations General Assembly and talks about Iran as a dictatorship under the guise of democracy, he's forgetting the fact that in countries that are allies of the United States, the concept of ballot box doesn't exist. We're celebrating today as people, as women get a right to drive in some of your allies.
Yes, we took note of that today in the paper.
Oh yeah, look at the realities of the situation. The United States wants to neglect all those realities. That is not in the interest of the United States.
You were suggesting the United States wants to ignore those realities in terms of who it believes in and seems to want to have the friendliest of relations. That's your point.
That
the United States has friends in the region who you believe violate the tenets of what it says it stands for.
Well, do I need to say that?
Giving you an opportunity to say that.
Well, I think facts speak for themselves.
This goes back to the point I was trying to make.
Go back to 9/11. How many Iranians were involved in 9/11? Go back to every... You see, I'm proud of Iranians in the United States. Iranians in the United States are the leaders of business, leaders in academia. And Iranians are barred from entering the United States. But the citizens of the countries who blew up the World Trade Center can come to the United States with every freedom. I'm not asking anybody to be excluded from the United States, but I certainly cannot accept any American president insulting my country and my compatriots.
You suggested earlier that you would like to see, Iran would like to talk to anybody. What ought to be the conversation between the United States and Iran about the future relationship between the two countries?
I think we have a saying in Farsi, prove your brotherhood and then ask for inheritance. The United States needs to prove that it's a reliable negotiating partner.
And there's no responsibility.
We spent 2 years, probably Secretary Kerry and I spent more time together than we spent with our wives negotiating this deal. So let's respect the deal we negotiated. I'm not in love with the deal. I believe
You're not in love with the deal?
No, because I believe the deal has a lot of flaws. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a deal. I mean, if the deal was 100% in my favor, the United States would be out of its mind to accept it. And the same is true for Iran. If you have a perfect deal, it has to be imposed by one side against the other. So, if you're asking me about the United States...
I'm asking you, what's the path to the future? What's the path to a better relationship? Because
the path is to respect...
As you well know, one of the things that President Obama was arguing with the Saudis is that he wanted to see in the region a more dialogue between and recognition of competing interests, but dialogue between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And that was the point that you'll agree with that.
And Charlie, who did what? After we agreed to the nuclear deal, a point was made by the then chairman of the GCC, where Saudi Arabia is a prominent member, that now that Iran has done a deal with 5+1, why don't it engage with 6+1, that is GCC plus Iran. I immediately flew to Kuwait and Qatar. At that time, Qatar was the chairman of the GCC, and I told them I'm ready. Saudis rebuffed them. Then again, they sent the foreign minister of Kuwait in early 2017 to Iran, suggesting on behalf of the GCC that we engage in dialogue. Our president went to Kuwait and responded positively to that suggestion. The Emir of Kuwait asked our president to put that in writing. We did put it in writing. And then the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia had an interview with an American news outlet saying that we will never engage in dialogue with Iran. So go and search for the problem where it lies. It's not in Tehran. Our interest is in dialogue. We are a country that is confident of its power, confident of its size, confident of its people. We don't purchase security from outside. We get our security from our own people.
Suggesting that the Saudis are purchasing their security from outside.
I'm not suggesting.
Help us understand this then. We've talked about there was a misstatement you have suggested by President Trump with respect to missiles. What is Iran's attitude and what is its program having to do with the development and deployment of missiles, which is not part of the nuclear deal?
Thank you for reminding us that it's not part of the nuclear deal. But you see, you want to deal with missiles, you need to look at our history.
You argue that they are for deterrence purposes. And
they are for defense
But you can imagine that other people don't necessarily assume that they should accept at face value your definition of what they're about.
Fine. So what we need to do is look at the facts. Last year, Saudi Arabia spent $67 billion on weapons. The United Arab Emirates which is, what, hundreds of our size, 600,000, I mean, less than a million, we are 80 million population, spent 14 billion on, these are not my numbers, CIPRI numbers, and Iran spent 6 billion on defense. Are we supposed to defend 80 million Iranians, or are we not? You see, these people, the Iranian people, were subjected to 8 years of war. Everybody supported Saddam Hussein. You remember that? When Saddam Hussein was using chemical weapons against our civilians, nobody cared. I remember going to the president of the Security Council as a very young diplomat. I was 25 years old. Went to the president of the Security Council, told him, Mr. President, chemical weapons are being used against Iran. And I'm saying it publicly. He told me, I'm not authorized to talk to you about this. Our people were being bombed by missiles. We didn't have a single missile to defend ourselves. We didn't have a single missile to use as a deterrence. Aren't we obliged to our citizens to defend them? If somebody, I mean, Saddam Hussein, when he was bombing our cities, he was a sweetheart of the West. He was using chemical weapons against Iran, and former Ambassador Bolton used to say that weapons are weapons. We went through.
Yeah, but I mean, please don't suggest that's an American attitude.
That was
weapons are weapons because you know better than that.
No, Charlie. I'm not making allegations. Go check the papers.
But don't suggest
the United States. The United States provided helicopters as agricultural equipment to Iraq that were used against Iran in the war. German firms provided chemical weapons to the Iraqis. I mean, these are facts of history. But I'm not asking you to believe me. Go check the Security Council records. From 1985 to 1988, there are 6 reports by the Secretary General of the United Nations saying that chemical weapons were used against Iran by Iraq. Find a single Security Council resolution condemning Iraq for the use of chemical weapons. A single Security Council resolution. And now people are telling me that chemical weapons are a red line for them? Nonsense. Ask any Iranian. No Iranian believes that chemical weapons are a red line for any Western country because you tolerated their use by Iraqis against Iranian civilians. Weapons were used in Sardasht against Iranian civilians. No condemnation by the international community. We brought the victims here to New York. I was here as a junior diplomat. We brought victims from Iraqi city of Halabja.
Mr. Foreign Minister, allow me to talk.
No condemnation, my friend.
But
I'm not making allegations.
Okay, let me raise the question.
Please, check the record.
I hear you clearly.
Thank you. No, so we are entitled to defend our people. We are prepared to reduce military spending in the region by everybody.
I asked this question of you as well, and you make the point with respect to how Iran was the victim of chemical weapons. So when the government you supported in Syria was using chemical weapons, were you there strongly denouncing them for using those chemical weapons?
We denounced the use of
at the same time that the United States at that time was denouncing it, and American journalists were pointing it out.
We denounced the use of chemical weapons, regardless of the victim and culprit. But
it was the government and the country that you were supporting that was using chemical weapons in Syria. Many will argue that government would not have survived without Hezbollah and your support along with Russia.
Can I respond to your question? We asked for an international investigation.
But was that to determine whether they were using them or not?
No, to determine who had used them.
So are you questioning now that the Syrian government may not have used chemical weapons?
No. What I say is that we are in Syria not to support anybody, but to fight ISIS. We asked the international community to examine the evidence. You see, we went through... Charlie, let me explain this. We went through...
We're friends, and you have to understand this.
And that's why...
That's why he's here with me, and that's why he wanted me to do this interview.
Exactly.
So just make sure that's understood.
It doesn't look like it, but it is.
It is. It's true.
No, Charlie.
And we hope it's beneficial in terms of trying to understand a full historical perspective.
But let me tell you, we went through a war with Iraq. The United Nations sent investigators to the war fronts to determine whether our allegations of the use of chemical weapons by the Iraqis were accurate. That's what we asked.
Okay.
Send the delegation.
But
send investigators. We helped with disarming Syria from chemical weapons. We were very instrumental in doing that.
This is the deal between the Soviet,
between Russia and the United States.
Right.
We were instrumental in getting the deal. We were instrumental in implementing the deal.
A deal made
by Kerry and Lavrov.
Right.
And we supported that deal. We encouraged that deal. We encouraged Lavrov to reach that deal.
So
and
what
we
if, in
applauded the
fact,
deal.
what would it take to convince you that the Syrians were using chemical weapons?
An international investigation. An on-site international investigation.
So,
that's what we called for.
But as of this moment, you do not know in your own mind whether the Syrians were using...
We know that chemical weapons... We know that chemical weapons
So
were
your
used.
question is, who was using them?
That's the question. That's the question. And that's the question that we have asked because we...
Is it more likely that the regime was using them?
We have no proof that that is the case, but let me tell you...
Do you want to see proof?
Let me tell you in the most...
Do you want
Oh,
to see
yeah, of
proof?
course I do. Of course I do. And we are ready to engage anybody at the intelligence level to check the evidence.
A country has been destroyed by a war, Syria.
Unfortunately.
Unfortunately.
And we need to end that. And we need to
And that's really a big question
system.
here, because Iran has been a part of that conflict in terms of who it supported, both in terms of Hezbollah.
Would you have liked ISIS to be sitting in Damascus, ruling Syria?
The assumption of that argument is that what Hezbollah has been doing there, and some of the people you support, the assumption of that is that they were primarily engaged against ISIS.
ISIS and
others will argue that they were
Nusra.
primarily engaged against those people opposing the Assad regime.
Come on, today, who is fighting ISIS in Deir ez-Zor? And who is preventing that fight?
Well,
No. I ask you a very clear question. Who is fighting? I'm giving you the location. Who is fighting ISIS in Deir ez-Zor? Who is fighting Nusra in Idlib? Who fought Nusra in Aleppo? These are factual questions. Who is...
So in this case, you and the governor of Iran, with respect to ISIS and Nasru, and you were suggesting that the United States, the government of the United States and the government of Iran are on the same side. They're there to
not
fight.
Necessarily, unfortunately.
They're there to fight ISIS and terrorism in Syria.
I certainly
That's
hope.
what is the... That is the stated goal for the United States being there, not to oppose the Assad regime, but
I certainly hope so, but ask them what they are doing on the east of Euphrates today. Not making allegations, I'm just asking a question. What are they doing on the east of Euphrates today? Why are they preventing the government from taking over? Why are they preventing the government from taking over ISIS positions on the east of Euphrates? For today, it seems to me that priorities have changed, and for the government of the United States, it's more important to prevent the Syrian government from taking over the border with Iraq than it is to defeat ISIS.
Some will argue that what the government of Iran wants is to have a clear Shia crescent.
Is that the reason we supported Qatar? Is that the reason we opposed
Is that
the reason we opposed the coup in Turkey? Is that the reason we supported the Sunni government of Afghanistan? Is that the reason we went to Erbil to prevent the ISIS from taking over Erbil? Are these Shia territories? Come on. People create a miniature, people create a paper target that they can hunt. These are just wrong assumptions.
Let me ask
answer my question. Why did we help prevent Erbil from fighting in the hands of Daesh? Was Erbil a Shia country? Was Erbil a Shia region? Why did we oppose the coup in Turkey? Was Turkey a Shia government?
No.
Why did we oppose the takeover of Qatar?
With respect,
why did we oppose the takeover of Kuwait?
Mr. Foreign Minister.
Yes, sir.
With respect, no one doubts that Iran is opposed to ISIS. That's not even a question on the table.
So why do you put
But
a
there is a
sectarian
question on the
flavor
table. But also there is this consideration. I mean, you can cite the history as you do, and you can cite where Iran has been a victim. Circumstances change, you know. I asked a question about the Taliban. You're saying in no interest, it is not in Iran's interest, you seem to be saying, for the Taliban to be victorious in Afghanistan.
Obviously not. No, it is in our interest for the government of Afghanistan
That
to
is
be
in
able
power
to,
today.
oh yes, to restore security in Afghanistan, but it is also in our interest to protect our borders. It is also in our interest to protect our citizens.
On the question of Afghanistan, then you have the same interest as the United States.
I certainly
to
hope so.
support the government in power against the Taliban.
Yeah,
and any allegations otherwise are simply not
I
true.
certainly hope so, but we never supported the Unocal deal during the Taliban government. It was the United States government which did. So we have a much better and much cleaner record in opposing the Taliban than anybody else. Please, don't forget history. We've been there. We've gone through it. We know what happened in the region. We have stood against the Taliban since day one. 11 of our citizens were killed in Mazar-e-Sharif. 11 of my colleagues were killed in Mazar-e-Sharif by the Taliban. We have been the force that fought the Taliban. We were the force that that kept the government, the legitimate government of Afghanistan, alive, so that when, after 2001, the United States decided to join the right side, it had somebody to fight the Taliban. Otherwise, it did not, because nobody else supported them.
In this conversation,
just check your history, please.
This conversation is looking to areas in which there might be an opportunity for the United States and Iran and other countries as well. This has been a troubled region, the area of the Middle East, and Iran is saying that it has regional ambitions and wants regional influence, and it believes it should have it because it's a great nation and it's a part of the community, correct?
We don't have ambitions. We want to live in a secure region. We are a great country. We are a major country in this region.
And do you believe the United States respects that?
We have natural influence. I believe the United States not only doesn't respect that, it wants to neglect that. And that has been the reason why the United States has gotten itself into one quagmire after another in our region.
Was it a United States opinion that if, in fact, we could make this nuclear deal, there might be other good relationships that would develop out of that, and they might take this opportunity where there was an agreement in which both sides won and both sides didn't get everything they wanted, and build on it? And what has happened is it has not been built on.
Well,
according to you.
On the day that nuclear deal was reached, I tweeted. Takes me a long time to tweet, though.
Yeah. Well, there's good news. Twitter may be increasing it from 140 to 280.
I said they haven't done it for me yet, although I like it. But I tweeted that this is the foundation and not the ceiling. This was our expectation. Right. We made it very clear that if people were prepared to engage on other issues, and if they showed their serious desire to really engage, then Iran would be a serious partner, as we proved to be in the nuclear case. I'm sorry to say that we haven't had a very positive experience over the last 2 years.
And are you prepared to say that all issues that may be raised by the United States or other countries who were signatories to the deal can be on the table?
No.
In terms of
no, that deal is over.
No, not the nuclear deal, but other issues that have become part of the concern of countries in the region and countries who are signatory to the deal. That Iran, believing in its own correctness, is open to the idea of looking at basic conflicts that exist.
I gave you...
And having a serious conversation about how to solve these problems. Whether it's Afghanistan,
or
whether it's Syria, or whether it's Lebanon.
We are already there. We went to Bonn, we established the government in Afghanistan. We went to Vienna. We went to
Bonn
Geneva.
was in what year? 2001.
Yeah.
After the collapse.
Yeah,
of
but we went to Vienna. We went to Lausanne. We went to Geneva. We went to New York. We participated in the meetings on Syria. We insisted on a political solution. There were others who said, with the help of God, we will either remove Bashar al-Assad politically or militarily. It wasn't Iran who said we will keep him in power militarily. It was others who wanted to get rid of him militarily. Now, if they are willing to reconsider that position, if they are willing to allow the Syrian peoples to make that decision for themselves, if they're willing to find a political scenario where we allow this brutal conflict to come to an end, just like what Iran, Russia, and Turkey have done, we brought de-escalation to 3 important areas of Syria. We are prepared to extend that to include all of Syria. We want a comprehensive ceasefire in Syria. We want comprehensive humanitarian...
Do you believe that the Russians want a comprehensive ceasefire?
I don't think they're opposed to it.
Do you believe the United States wants a comprehensive ceasefire?
I guess you should ask them. I'm not the closest
Why
partner
you
of
sit
the
here
United
and
States.
say, well, I know the Russians are, I know the Iranians are, I know.
Because
but when you ask about the United States, which has been asking for this kind of negotiation with the Russians for the last several years, and ask your friend John Kerry, who you still talk to, he will tell you they've been trying to get the Russians and other parties to come to a ceasefire and negotiated settlement about Syria. You know that because of your respect and his credibility with
I sat around the same table with John Kerry where I insisted on a political solution, and he supported my statement. There were others who opposed it, and that is why in none of the statements issued by the International Syria Support Group, you have that simple statement: there is no military solution to Syria. You don't have it. I mean,
you think the United States believe?
Don't believe a word of what I say. Read the statements. Read the statements.
Do you believe the United States thinks there's a military solution?
No, the United States doesn't. There are others, your friends, who believe it. So what I'm saying is, you asked me whether the United States wants this. I'm telling you I don't know. I'm not saying that it doesn't. I say I talked to President Putin. I know that President Putin wants to find a peaceful solution to Syria because it doesn't serve our interests, it doesn't serve their interests. Whether the United States is prepared to do it, ask somebody who has talked to President Trump recently. I haven't.
Well, nor have I. So let me end on this note too, because we'll take some questions from this audience. You mentioned in an AP interview that the possibility of an exchange of prisoners. Can you help us understand that? Because as you know, there are Americans concerned about Americans in prison in Iran.
Yeah, I know, and I'm concerned about both Americans in
I know you are. So what's possible here?
And I'm concerned about Iranians in prison, including a pregnant lady who has been in prison elsewhere outside the United States on an extradition request by the United States for a technical violation of sanctions that no longer exist 8 years ago. And she is even not being granted bail to live with her husband as she's expecting their baby.
I was hoping to keep this at the level that, you know, clearly the United States will argue that about some people that they believe are being held wrongfully in Iran. And so my question really goes to the positive side of this. What's the possibility? Is it likely to happen? Are their names being exchanged?
No,
Can we look
unfortunately.
Why not?
I don't know, unfortunately.
You're the foreign minister of Iran.
Yes, but I'm not the foreign minister of the United States.
So the foreign minister of the United States
as you say, it takes two to tango. With the previous administration, we had extensive discussions, and we were able to exchange some prisoners. Not all of our prisoners were released. I'm telling you, all American prisoners in Iran were released. Not all Iranian prisoners in the United States were released. We still have some in the United States. We have some elsewhere, and we have not, unfortunately, been able to engage in an exchange. The government of Iran has no authority over our judiciary, but we have authority under specific circumstances to negotiate. That opportunity has not been made available.
But you hope it will be.
I'm willing to look at it when it is.
Okay, before I close this, I want to give you an opportunity, anything that you want to say that you have not been able to say in terms of your vigorous defense of the government of Iran. You have a long relationship here in America. You've been in this country many times. You speak our language, you understand our culture, and we appreciate you being on this stage here at the Asia Society very much. You're my friend. I've enjoyed this long association, and I appreciate it. And I want to end by giving you an opportunity if there's anything that you feel like I have not understood or you want to say in the end.
Well, no, I believe there is no reason that the international situation, our region, would suffer under these circumstances. I believe through dialogue there can be accommodation. I believe that the threats that we're facing in our region, from extremism to water shortage, from sandstorms to people dying from cholera in Yemen, are common challenges. It requires all of us to work together. We have nothing against working with our neighbors to achieve greater security. We believe that security can only come from within the countries and within the region. We believe that the best way, we can choose a lot of things, but we cannot choose our neighbors. We may have differences, we may have grievances, and believe me, if your suggestion that we sit around the table and discuss regional issues, I'm sure the list of Iranian grievances would far exceed the list by the other side. But we are...
And they should be on the table.
But yes, they should be on the table. And we have been prepared in the past to put them on the table. Unfortunately, there are others who believe they can stay behind the cover of a smoke screen. I think that has not served anybody's purpose for the last 40 years. I don't think it will serve anybody. Look at the situation in our region. We made the right choices. I'm not trying to boast because we live in a very dangerous neighborhood. If you live in a dangerous neighborhood...
That's why it's important.
It is important. I believe it is important. And I believe there is no reason we shouldn't talk to our neighbors. We should talk to our neighbors. And we have done everything possible in order to engage. Don't give them that smoke screen.
It's a pleasure to see you. Thank you for coming. We thank the audience here at the Asia Society. I thank the Foreign Minister, Javed Zarif, for this conversation, which I hope will be enlightening to people trying to understand the perspective of people who play a crucial role in finding a better world. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time. So here's what we're going to do. Some of you have had cards. I have to, as he knows and Tom Nagorski knows, have this previous engagement that I had to go that I had to push back. So we want to give you your questions, which you've gladly filled out on a card. And Tom has graciously said he'll sit here and do that. Where's Tom?
He ran away.
He ran away. But I want to make sure we raise those questions. So who has the cards? Where is? Thank you very much.
Sure, Charlie. Thank you.
Pleasure. All right. Did they collect cards from you?
Were they good questions?
Are they good questions? Yeah. We didn't cover everything, but we got a lot covered. Here he is. Please welcome Tom Nagorski.
My apologies. I thought our time was up. Charlie, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Charlie.
Thank you. Thank you. Good to see you. Thanks. Bye.
And Mr. Minister, I'll do this from here because I'm not mic'd. I can tell you, because I went through this, that the most interesting question from my mind was, are you going to run for president of Iran?
No.
No, I figured that might.
And that's the most interesting answer, so
Categorical.
put it to bed.
The issue is many of these have been asked by Charlie already, but here's one. Given the new travel ban in this country that affects Iranians, with some exceptions, do you think it will be possible for Americans in greater numbers to get visas to visit your country? Very important for building understanding and leadership.
Well, if I make the final decision, the answer would be yes. But I have to go through a process. Visas in Iran for American citizens go through a process. And Iranians are known for their hospitality, and I hope that we can exercise that hospitality for as many Americans as possible. So I would love to invite every American to come to Iran, but I don't have that authority. I'll do my best on my part to give as many visas as possible, but others have to help.
Yeah, good. I particularly appreciate in my old life, I used to spend a lot of time coming to your mission here trying to get visas for our people in the press. Okay, how can you persuade skeptics that the Rouhani administration's views on the deal have a broad enough adherence in Iran to withstand attacks from future administrations? That's a follow-up related to something Charlie asked.
Well, the reality on the ground is that 7 IAEA reports vindicate us. People believe that we will not be able to implement the deal. We did. People believe that we will not be able to sustain the deal. We did. We did it against all odds. And I believe one thing you can be confident about Iran is that we bargain hard. I think, no, I don't know whether this is an Iranian carpet.
The odds are good, I think. Yeah.
The odds are good. We are very patient. We are very patient, but we want to produce good quality product. Once we do it, we stick to it. There are a lot of things we don't like about this nuclear deal, but it's something that we agreed to, and we have observed. Even the parts that we don't agree, particularly the parts that we don't agree, and we don't like, but we have observed. Tells you that when we make a deal, we stick to it. Yep. And this is a national commitment. Even everybody has said that Iran will not violate, it will not be the first to violate its undertaking.
After October 15th, we will see, right? So just a couple more. Really, Charlie has asked many of these already, and I'm mindful of the time. He asked about the Kurdish referendum. This is a specific question in that regard. Can you discuss Iran's relationship with Turkey in the context of the Kurdish referendum?
Well, I think countries in the region, along with countries outside the region, have similar views about the dangers of such tendencies in our region, because it would be the beginning of conflict, not the end of conflict. I believe it won't serve the interests of the Kurds. As I told you, we are eternal friends of the Kurds. We went to their help time and again. We've always been on their side. And we believe this doesn't serve the interest of the Kurdish people. We believe now we have a Kurd as president of the Republic of Iraq. It is important to maintain the territorial integrity, national unity of Iraq as a single sovereign government. And all various communities in Iraq, and Iraq is a country of communities, all various communities in Iraq would enjoy their freedoms and enjoy their rights. And I think that's doable through negotiation and compromise.
Now, there's one more here, and the problem with this one is we could be here all night long, but I'll give it to you anyway, Minister. What has Iran done recently to reconcile Shia and Sunni?
Well, you see, we are a minority in the Muslim world. No minority wants to be in a perpetual conflict with the majority. We need to go to Hajj every year. During the Hajj, there are only a few Shias and a whole lot of Sunnis. We want to live in peace with them. We believe in the message that unity of all Muslims is indispensable. We believe that sectarian divisions in the Muslim world are destructive. We believe that sectarian divisions are being used for political purposes. We certainly are ready, And it is in our interest as a minority to engage with everybody else. So what have we done lately? Almost everything. We supported the government of Turkey in the coup against it. We supported the government of Qatar when it was being suffocated. And Qatar is the only other country belonging to a Wahhabi school of thought. So we are not, we are a Shia majority country, but we have no interest in a sectarian conflict in the region, and I hope nobody else would have that interest.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. It's been a pleasure. It's also been a very strange experience sitting in for Charlie Rose. Thank you all for coming.